Hello everybody and welcome to another Learn tutorial. In this tutorial, in case you haven't already guessed, we're making a clone of the arcade classic Space Invaders. It's an awesome little game. It looks quite simple, but actually there's a lot going on. There's different things moving, clones and destructible scenery and stuff. So this is going to be one of the longer tutorials that I do, and I'm going to probably split it up into about 3 parts. If this is your first Scratch game that you're making, I would not recommend this one. I'd love to have a look at one of the other tutorials that I've done, like the Beetle game or Falling Ball or something like that. Have a look on my channel. Don't do this as a first ever Scratch project unless you're really, really brave or stupid, or both. Okay, so let's get started. So the first part, what we're going to do is we're just going to get all of the sprites appearing on the screen. So let's get going. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of Scratch the Cat. So click on X, goodbye Scratch. And we're going to start doing the backdrop. So if we click onto the backdrop, it's pretty simple. It's going to be black, and then you've got these bunkers, and then you've got a line below the bunkers, but mine's just been destroyed. So let's create the basics of that. So click onto the backdrop, and let's click to convert to bitmap, because it's simpler to work on that at the moment. And click fill. Drag it down to the brightness to 0, and we'll flood fill. There we go, brilliant, good. Now, when you're creating the bunkers, you can create them by hand if you want to in using the paint tool in Scratch, or you can do what I did, which is I used a web app called Piskel, and I created all of my sprites using a pixel sprite generator here. Just did them by hand and just copied them what I could, and then I clicked export. That takes quite a while. It took me about an hour to create all the pixel art that I needed, but you don't have to. I'll put a link in the video where you can download all of the sprites that you need and then just upload them into the project, just like I'm doing now. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to upload the bunker, each of the bunkers. So we click on bunker. I've picked these. Once you've downloaded, upload the bunker, and there is a green bunker. Convert it to vector, and then what we'll do is we'll just click on him and we will copy him. Control C to copy, or click copy there. Go into the backdrop, convert your backdrop to a vector, and then we'll paste it in there. So now we've got one of the bunkers. Let's set him about there. Good. And then we'll just do that about 3 or 4 times, and you'll probably want to zoom in closer to make sure they're all on the same line, but I'm just going to leave mine. I'm just going to do mine by hand. There you go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, that'll do. Again, you can play with yours, make sure they're all on the right lines and all evenly spaced and stuff, but I'm going to do mine like that. Good, so there we go. We've got my bunkers there, which is brilliant. We also need this line down the bottom there. So what we'll do here is we're going to use the, but I won't use the line tool now. What we'll do is we'll convert to bitmap, and then we're going to use the square tool. The reason being is it can draw a nice straight line. And what we'll do is we'll click on the eyedropper, click there, and now our fill is just the right color. And the reason we've chosen the rectangle tool now instead of the line tool is that when we draw this line, there you go, it's a straight line. Perfect. Let's just move that a bit longer. Hey, good. There we are. So now we've got the basics. There's our background of our game, and that's all sorted. Let's just get rid of the other costume. So that's the first part. There's the backdrop with our bunkers sorted. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the player, and we're going to put the player on there. So we'll just choose sprite, upload a sprite, and I'm going to choose player. Where's my player? There's player. Good. Again, you can draw these yourself if you want to, but I'm just uploading them. Makes the tutorial go a bit quicker. There we are, there's our player, good. Let's move on to displaying the enemies. So in order to display an enemy, again, we're going to use the sprites that I've created, or you can create your own. And all we're going to do is click upload sprite, and we're going to pick the first enemy that we're going to display, which is Skull 1. Let's just go there. There we go, there's Skull 1. There's my enemy, and he's probably going to start about here, but we don't need to worry about him just yet. So there's my skull, and the idea is the enemy, he moves left and right, there's going to be loads of them, and he animates between two costumes. At the moment, he's only got one costume, which is Skull 1. So let's get that second costume on there. In order to add a second costume, don't go upload new sprite because that'll be a different sprite, but just stick to the same sprite and go upload costume, and let's add Skull 2. There we go. So now what we've got is we've got two costumes, Skull 1, Skull 2, and if you look over here, when we rotate between them, you can see that he animates. So I'm going to have some way of rotating between the two of them, and we'll look at that in a little bit. Obviously, we don't just want one enemy. We're going to need five rows and 11 columns of enemies. Now, we could just keep clicking right-click and duplicate on this sprite and do that 55 times, but that's a bit of a waste of effort and causes other problems as well, such as if you make a mistake in the coding one of them, you've got to edit all 50. So there's a bit of a clever way of doing that. Instead of creating 55 copies, we'll just clone the same sprite 55 times. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to use the create a clone tool. The create clone block. But the sprite himself isn't going to control his clones. We're going to get the backdrop here, which I like to look as the kind of the game master. He's going to be in charge of saying, okay, let's create loads of clones. So click on the backdrop, here we go. And what we do now is to say, okay, at the start of the level, when I receive new start level, the game master, which is the backdrop here, the stage, he is going to create loads of clones. Well, how many is he going to create? Well, he's going to create 5 times 11, which is 55. And in order to do that in a nice, clever way, all we need to do is we use this little setup here. We have a repeat inside of a repeat. The inner repeat is going to repeat 11 times, which is going to be each column. And then at the end of each column, we're going to go up a row and then start again for each column. And I'll show you why in a minute. So we use the 11 by 5, which is good. Make that slightly bigger. And we need to keep track when we're creating all these clones of which column and which row we're on. And the way that we do that is we go to variables, get rid of my variable here because we don't need him. Click make a variable, and we need to keep track of the current row that we're on. And we also need to keep track of the current column. So set, Now, when we first start creating all of these clones, the current column is going to be 1 and the current row is going to be 1. And then what we want to do is go through all of the current columns. So change the column by 1. And then after we've gone all the way along through row 1 of column 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way to the end. Once we get to the end, we go back to column 1, but we change the current row by 1. Now you're probably thinking, hang on a minute, why are we doing all this? Well, let me just show you here now. If I just put a 0.3 seconds in here, wait. If I click on here, watch what happens to the current row and column. There you go. Can you see it goes all the way up, tick, 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 and then it goes on to the next one, row 2, tick, 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 tick. There we go. Good. And it's going through all of the different rows, which is great. And it's going current row, current row, current row. Now you're probably going, well, hang on, what's all this going to do? Why are those numbers useful? Well, I'll show you in a second. But what we want to do now is, rather than every time we're on this inner loop here, we don't wait a second. What we do is we just create a clone. Create a clone. Where's this at? Create a clone of the enemy, which is called Skull 1 at the moment. Let's rename that Skull 1 to enemy, because that's what he is. Good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create 55 clones of the enemy. But the clever thing is that we're going to keep track of the current row and column while we do it. Why is that important? Well, watch this. When I start as a clone, all we need to do is we just need to move the 55 clones to the correct place. And the way we do that is we use set X and set Y, because we're going to set both of those coordinates. And this is where we use these variables here. Because what we say is, okay, well, we want to start the X coordinate. We're going to start making them over here. Now, in Scratch, the X goes from minus 240 to 0 in the middle to 240, the X coordinates. So we want to start at about minus probably 220 or something. Let's say minus 220. There you go. So we want to start producing them at minus 220, but depending on which column they're in, we want to move them along. If they're in column 2, we want to move them along 50. If we want in column 3, we need to move them along by 75. And the way we can do that is we'll just use a bit of simple maths. And we say, okay, it's going to be whatever their current column is, their x-coordinate is going to be start at minus 220. And it's going to be whatever the current column is multiplied by the amount of space in between each one. And that's okay. Now, as for the current row, it's a similar sort of thing with the y-coordinate, but we don't start at minus 220 because the y-coordinate goes from 0 in the middle, 180 at the top, and minus 180 at the bottom. So actually, probably starting at about 0, I would say, on the y-coordinate. But same sort of thing, but it's going to be multiplied by the current row. So now, hopefully, we should see something if we click here. There you go. And that's how we get all of the clones of all of the sprites in the right place. What we'll do is we'll just hide these variables because we don't need to see them. Now we've got a couple of problems here. We've got an extra sprite there knocking around, and that's because this bit here creates all the clones, but of course you've got the original enemy who isn't a clone. And we need to do something with him to keep him out of the way, because otherwise he's going to be a bit of a pain in our game. And what we do is we say, okay, when start is clicked, we're going to hide the original guy here, and we're going to move him out of the way right down to the bottom. That way he can't get shot or get in the way or anything like that. So we'll just move him, set his y coordinates to, I don't know, minus 180 or something. I'll get him right out of the way. So in fact, let's do minus 200, see if we can get him right out of the way. And so we'll hide him and we'll put him right down the bottom here out of the way so we can't cause problems to our game. But that also means that whenever these guys start as clones, we're going to need to make sure they show, otherwise they'll disappear. So let's just try that. Start game. Yes, he's disappeared. Start the level. Brilliant. Good. So we've got those there, which is great. And if you look at the enemy sprite, if you were to change the costume, then they'll just flick between the different costumes. But at the moment, what we've got a bit of a problem is that we've only got one type of enemy. And these are what I call the skulls. These guys here are the skulls. And we've got 5 rows of skulls, which is not actually what we need. If you look, we've got, in the actual game, we need 2 rows of skulls, 2 rows of what I call frogs, and then 1 top row of squid. So we need to be able to work out what character we're going to display here. And the way that we do that is pretty simple. The first thing we need to do is when we start as a clone, we need to remember what type of character we're going to be. And the way we can do that is we just keep track of what row we were when we were created. So we create a new variable and we call it myRow. And this is going to be for this sprite only. Make sure you click this. If you click that, then nothing's going to work. It's all going to go wrong. So for this sprite only, and what we say here is we go, okay, when I start as a clone, set my row to whatever the current row is. So as each of the sprites are created, they will be able to remember which row they're supposed to be on. Brilliant, good. So how are we going to use that? Well, whenever they animate, what's going to happen is they're going to switch between costumes. Now, if we go back to costumes, at the moment, if you're on rows 1 or 2, then they're going to need to animate and switch between these costumes, skull 1 or skull 2. And if they're on row 3 or 4, then they're going to need to switch between the other ones, and then row 5, it's going to be the other ones. So let's upload all of the rest of the costumes ready to go. So upload costume. So the next one is frog 1. There you go, there's my frog costume. And then we're going to have frog 2. And then we're going to have the jellyfish 1. And then upload one more costume, jellyfish 2. So these sprites, they're pretty much the same, but they have different costumes. Rows 1 and 2 are going to rotate between these ones. Rows 3 and 4 are going to rotate between those. And rows 5 and 6 are going to rotate between those. So let's create the code that's going to rotate between them. Now, when they're rotating, when you're switching between different costumes, then that's like animating. So we're going to create a new event, and we're going to call this animate. So when I receive new message, animate, depending on which row we're on, we're going to flip between the costumes. So let's just have a go at that one. Here we go. So it's going to be an if, and if we're on rows 1 or 2. So we're going to use an or because it could be either row 1 or row 2. There we go. And variables. So if my row is row 1 or my row is row 2, then we're going to switch between these costumes, either the skull 1 or skull 2. But which one do we pick? Well, we've got to be a little bit clever about this. And the reason being is if you look at all of these sprites, they all animate at the same time. And they've all got matching costumes. They use the same one. So we need to have some way of making sure that they're all switching to the right costume. They're not just picking random ones. And the way we can do that is they just flip-flop between the two. So what we'll do is we need to create a way so that it constantly flip-flops. So for the moment, let's just say, okay, when start clicked, let's just create ourselves a little loop. Repeat. There we go. And, oh no, not one time. Let's just do it forever. Forever. And we're going to flip-flop. We're just going to wait a second, and then we're going to flip-flop. And the way we do that, create ourselves a new variable and call it flip-flop. It's going to flip-flop between the two of them. And all we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, if... yeah, good. If our flip-flop is on flip, then set it to flip. Then we'll set the flip-flop to flop. Doesn't really matter what you call these. You don't have to call them flip-flop. You can call them whatever you want. Otherwise, set it to flip. There you go. And you can see what it's done there now. If you look at it here, there you go. It's flipping between the two. Flip, flop, flip, flop, flip, flop. And it will just keep doing that forever. Okay, we'll leave that. We're going to move this into here in a little while, but we'll just leave that there for the moment. So now what we need to do is we need to use this flip-flop variable that we've created, this global one. And what we're going to say is every time this player receives animate, we're going to flip between the two. So what we do here is we go, okay, if my row is 1 or row 2, then if it's on flip, then we change it to costume 1. If it's on flop, we change it to costume 2. So if flip-flop equals flip, then we'll change our costume. Oh, I've got that costume here, haven't I? There he is, look. Skull. Otherwise, we'll change it to skull 2. There you go. So when I receive animate, if my row is 1 or row 2, then we just flip between them. And what we do now is we duplicate that, and we just edit the code for the other ones. So if you're on rows 3 or 4, then they're going to rotate between the frog 1 and frog 2. And then finally, if you're on row 5, it's only row 5, so we don't need that or. then we flip-flop between the skulls. No, the jellyfish, isn't it? Jellyfish. There we go. Good. So hopefully now we've got all of that when I receive animate. And I'll just show you, let's have a look. Flip-flops every second. And we'll just broadcast animate after every time, after every second. So now, if we click start level, hey, brilliant. So let's just get rid of that there. Let's hide that. Let's go into the enemy and hide that there. Good. So now we've got pretty much there. We've got our characters here, our enemies starting at the top, the player at the bottom, and they're animating between them. The only other thing we need to do is we also need to upload the Saucer. Let's use him. He's like a special enemy that doesn't actually attack you, but it's like get bonus points. And there you go. So pretty much what we've got now is we've got all of the characters, all of the main sprites that are going to be used, and we've got the enemies animating between, flip-flopping between these two costumes. Okay, well that's enough for part one. We'll pause it there. What I will do is I'll make a copy of this project here, save it as part one, and put a link in the comments so that if you do get to this point and it's something's broken or you don't want to go back through the tutorial, you can then start part two just from where we were up to there. Okay, thank you very much, and we'll move on to part two in a moment.